Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Pillar Performance Podcast. We've had a few weeks off with a few team members being on leave for the European summer holidays, but looking forward to getting stuck back into the podcast and the rest of the year. Of course, on this podcast, we sit down with leaders in their field of research and high performance, the teams, but particularly the founders of these companies that exist within our field of endurance, nutrition, and fitness. At Pillar, we are on a mission to get athletes to their start line in the best condition, and we enable that by providing clinical micronutrition supplements across sleep, recovery, inflammation, energy, and immunity. On this week's episode, Dr. Dan Plews, our head of research here at Pillar, sits down with sports nutrition expert, PhD Mikki Williden, about optimizing diets and supplementation for athletes. Mikki, funnily enough, actually has her own podcast called Micopedia, which launches episodes weekly, so you should definitely check that out. This deep dives into the topics of nutrition, also longevity, fitness, and health. And for those of you who don't know, Mikki also co-hosts a weekly endurance sports podcast called Fitter Radio. Again, you guys should check it out. It's a great listen. On this episode, Dan and Mikki actually explore the benefits of low-carb and high-fat approach as a method of fueling for endurance sports. Mikki debunks a lot of common myths about protein intake and really emphasizes the importance of individualized nutrition programming, and particularly as that obtains into female athletes. They also discuss really key supplements in micronutrition, obviously magnesium being one, and Mikki also shares insights into her own routine and what she does from a macro and micro nutritional point of view for her own performance. There's some real gems in this chat, and I'm looking forward to getting it onto air. Enjoy.
Welcome, Mikki, PhD in nutrition, applied practitioner, and, dare I say, avid ultra runner. Can I call you that?
Yes, you can. Although I would say that my zone of genius probably is in the marathon circa 10 years ago, but still, I love a marathon distance, Dan. I love the training for a marathon, and
it's just a baby distance, really. It's cute not to do it before a 3.8k swim and a 180k ride. It just makes it into like the cute category,
Oh my God! Well, I tell you what, it gets. I will tell you this funny story. We were in Rotorua last year because my husband Barry, I call him Hubster. He was down doing the 100k, and I was supposed to do it, but I had that. I fell and broke my leg, so couldn't. And we were
slight problem.
I
do remember that now. It was your ankle, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. It was at the top of the fibula. So I sort of landed and sort of bounced, and that's what happened. But typically it is down in the ankle. But mine wasn't. And I was sitting at a table of ultra runners, and we were just sort of talking, and one of them turns to me and goes, "Oh, so are you an ultra runner?" And I'm like, "Oh, actually, I prefer road running. I've run for 35 years or whatever it was at that time." And she's like, and she got that, the mountain bike and the road cyclists. Yeah. She got that about it. I'm like, I didn't realize that was a thing. I thought
there's a thing in between mountain biking and road cycling. There's a thing between triathletes and road cyclists as well.
Is there?
I'll forward you this Instagram post that I posted the other day. It was so funny. Okay. It's all about the difference between like triathletes and road cyclists, and but anyway. But yeah, there is that for sure.
Yeah. So but I love a trail run for being out in nature. But you just can't beat a decent hit on the road, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good. And of course, your background is in nutrition. Mm-hmm. Your PhD your PhD was at Otago?
No, my master's and my undergrad were at Otago, and my PhD was at AUT.
Yeah.
So looking more in that public health space of sort of productivity, nutrition, stress, physical activity. So it was much broader than a sort of specific nutrition focus, which is actually where I spend the majority of my time is, obviously in nutrition.
And who were your supervisors then?
I had Professor Grant Schofield.
Obviously, yeah, I knew that. I just wanted to bring it out. So Grant Schofield is a friend of ours. He is a professor of public health here at AUT Millennium, AUT University. So also avid triathlete as well.
Yes, he is, and just health. Like he's such an advocate for health and people sort of doing just getting knowledge out there and, I don't know, cutting the BS when it comes to health.
I'm a big fan of Grant. I will definitely get him on the show, actually.
Good.
At some point. That's kind of a bit of a must, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Grant
so. So you had Grant, and who was your second one? Sorry?
It was Professor Scott Duncan, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And he was great too. So it was such a great experience. And you know what I learned, and I think this is relevant for the athlete population actually, because we talk so much about how important diet is, and of course how important it is to be physically active. But ultimately, in that sort of corporate setting, regardless of your habits in that space, stress was the biggest sort of indicator of potential productivity that we were looking at, but also other potential health biomarkers. And
okay, so to put that in context then, so it seemed like overall general stress had greater implications on your productivity than diet and exercise generally.
Yeah, it was a little bit disappointing as a nutritionist to find that out.
But how much is good diet and exercise affecting stress though?
That's a very good call. I mean, and you could never answer the question with the sort of research model that I used, obviously, which was sort of cross-sectional, and they absolutely interplay. But I think as well as that, often when people feel they're not making progress with, like I deal a lot with improving body composition for both athletes and general population, obviously, and when people don't make progress in that space, they often want to either diet harder or exercise more. And they often look to what can I do more and what do I need to sort of push the boundaries on, when sometimes it's either the stress of what they're doing or just outside stress. Like people underestimate how important that outside stress.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know, if I'd have known you back then, which I didn't, I'd have had you doing the HRV. Within that, did you do any HRV in that study?
No, but that would. I don't think HRV was a thing actually, or it would have just been being a thing when I was doing it.
When did you finish your PhD? What year?
I was 2012, I think. I was working as a lecturer, so it was part of my job to do it. Yeah.
So I mean, I was one of the first people to do PhD. I finished my do HRV, and I finished my PhD in 2013.
Oh, there you go.
So it wouldn't have been. It was. But basically after then it went massive. But to give it a bit of context, one of the reasons like HRV is really interesting in the workplace, because it's been shown that if you think about your parasympathetic activity, it's almost like a sink, right? So people who have higher parasympathetic activity can generally cope with more stress.
Yeah.
And exercise and all the things that you can do to increase your HRV, increase your parasympathetic activity, improves your ability to deal with stress. So generally more stressed people, it makes sense, because if you're more sympathetic, you're generally more stressed, and you can cope with, before you hit the critical point, it's going to not be that much. But no, I remember the first time we met, if you can recall, it was when me and Paul Lawson were going into the low-carb, high-fat space.
That's right.
And you, Karen Zinn, Grant Schofield were all kind of going into the low-carb, high-fat space. And I think back then, compared to what we are now, certainly, we were this is the only way, Yeah,
oh no, so zealot. I know. It's always embarrassing to look back. And I have this record, Dan, because this is before I started my business nutrition page.
Yeah.
So I used to post things on my personal page. And so now they're always coming up as these memories. And I'm like, oh, cringe.
Yeah, I know. It's funny when I look back at that. I mean, obviously we still are in that space, and we still think it is applicable to some people, and it's great. But back then I remember that it was like, no one knows what they're talking about in this. And I remember we sat in a room with High Performance Sport New Zealand, the nutrition department, and we were trying to convince them as to why they need to consider this. And it was painful, wasn't it?
It was. But I do remember. I remember that was because when I saw, when I was reflecting back on, how long I'd known you, I remember that meeting well. Actually, that's quite hilarious.
It was really good. It was really good, but. But man, it was so funny. I mean, when you come, I think both of you and I, we've kind of evolved in our thoughts around nutrition, and I do want to talk about this a little bit more. Is that we've probably both become a little bit more protein-centric, into the protein and thinking, really. I mean, now when I tell my athletes, I think if you focus on the protein, as an athlete at least, fats and carbs can almost take care of themselves. But if you have that in place, it doesn't matter too much what you do with the fats and carbohydrates, dependent on what you're trying to achieve from a metabolism point of view, really, in the sport you're doing. But I mean, I would love to hear you talk about how you've come from where you were very low carb and evolved over time, as any good academic or any good nutritionist should. And I think what speaks to you, what you've done, is that you have gone that way, but there's many people in the high carb space who will not even consider lower carb, and I think that just says that in the first place the cognitive dissonance is so high that they're just not going to move at all. But when you've kind of had a mind shift and then you've shifted back, it's a lot easier, But I'd love to hear how you've made that shift, and now your view is more on the macro level, carbs, proteins, and fats.
Yeah, nice, Dan. And I think if I just think about my personal journey, if that's not an overused term, with it, I think before we met, I think it was obviously the research element at AUT. It was being involved with Professor Grant Schofield and Associate Professor Karen Zinn. And we were just in that space researching, super interested in the health aspect. And then, of course, after talking to yourself and Paul, we got more interested in the athlete sort of experience with it. But also another major model for me was Sarah Wilson. And I don't know if you know that name.
No, I don't know that name, no.
Yeah, no. So she I think some of your listeners will be familiar with her, particularly maybe in Australia, because she's Australian and she wrote the book I Quit Sugar, and she started that program.
Oh, I do know. Kate has done her courses and
yes.
And she did it just before we got married, actually, and she loves it. Yeah, she responded really well to it.
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily it wasn't so strictly low carb as we were sort of advocating. I would say it was more sort of probably low to moderate, but it certainly got me thinking about food quality, I think.
Yeah.
And this is relevant to your question as to how I evolved. And I think part of it was there was Sarah Wilson, there was everyone in that paleo space. So
Chris Evans and whatnot.
Yes, yeah. Yep. And Rob Wolf and Diana Rogers and a whole host of those people. And I think back in that day, most people were probably more low carb than not. But then I guess isn't it just sort of experience in the space and actually seeing the sort of clinical outcomes of what happens if that is the only way that people operate. You and I, we work with athletes, not just endurance athletes, but other types of sports and stuff. And there is clearly a need for more carbohydrate when the intensity is greater for some people. And not all the time. I know there is research, and you've been involved in research that shows you can perform high intensity exercise in a ketogenic space, but for the majority of people, they're depending on what type of training or what type of sport or depending on what they're trying to achieve, it became quite clear, I think, a couple of years in that low carb wasn't going to cut it in all areas, which is, makes real sense, right? Because there's no one blanket rule for anything.
It's the same throughout, right? Is that high carb doesn't make sense in all areas either, or low fat or anything. And I think we've both come to the conclusion that, as always, it's context before content, right?
Yes. And I also think, though, that because I knew that, because I never thought that high carb, and most of us actually, me and my colleagues, it was almost like a dirty secret that there would be these sports nutrition guidelines of, 8, 9 or 10 grams of carbs per kg body weight for your endurance athlete. But we would never tell our athletes to do that.
And you know what? No athletes do that either.
Isn't it ridiculous? Like,
no athletes do that. And
I know.
And there's been papers published on that if you actually look at what athletes are really doing, they're not doing it.
It's like around 5 grams is like the average that they will have a day. Yeah.
So I just don't know why. I don't know why that's still kind of the guideline. I remember in one of our courses, it's the equivalent of like 80 slices of white bread or something
I know.
like that,
I know.
For like an 80-kilo person. It's like, yeah, I can't remember which it was, but it was a lot.
And of course, there will always be anomalies. You'll always have that high-performing athlete who will show you their Instagram videos of chugging down hundreds of grams of carbohydrate and almost to the point of, look at how elite I am in my sport and look how healthy I am,
Yeah.
But there's no room for other nutrients for most people in that space.
Well, once you get that high, how are you going to fit anything else in without becoming, we're getting probably excess body fat that you don't really want,
That's exactly right. And then if I go back to the food quality sort of piece, it's like, well, if you're not wanting to sort of fill an athlete's diet with carbohydrate, yet you recognize that, there are elements of recovery, for example, are impaired if they're, running, if you run moderate fat and low carbohydrate, then what is there left? And it really is protein. And protein is, not only is it got those essential amino acids that we need, but it is nutrient dense. If good quality animal protein has a lot of the micronutrients that people are missing in their everyday diet because they are lower in protein. Like athletes just have an increased requirement for things like iron and zinc in your B vitamins, and not to sort of consider the zoo nutrients, which are like creatine and carnitine and even cholesterol. We still need to have sort of dietary cholesterol as well.
Yeah.
And
cholesterol is often overlooked because it's massive in immunity. Like if you don't have, there's really strong correlations between low cholesterol and poor immunity, right?
Yeah.
So, it's not a bad word, as though many people believe it to be a bad word. It's not
I know. Yeah.
Word. But so now, like, you've come into the protein space. So, like, maybe you could talk about, well, what would be a traditional guideline for a normal person in terms of grams per kilogram body weight of protein per day, and what do you think? What would you advocate? What should athletes be doing? I know I listened to a podcast that you did recently, and I thought it was fascinating on protein intake, and is there any potential damage that's going on in the kidneys or liver? Liver enzymes upregulated and whatnot. So
great questions. So if you look at sports nutrition literature, they would say that an endurance athlete requires around 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kg of body weight. That's sort of what you might see written in a textbook. And that's compared to the 0.8 grams per kg of body weight that the general population is recommended in the sort of government health sort of websites. So there is, an acknowledgement that the work that you put in as an endurance athlete will sort of increase the protein demands or the amino acid requirements of the body. However, I, not just me, but in my sort of reading around the area, and of course talking to experts in protein metabolism space, they would say that 1.6 grams per kg of body weight is a bare minimum. And then actually, if you're an athlete and you are out there for, hours in a week where you are breaking down tissue, like the microtears in your tissue that occurs through training that you then need to recover from, then it's really common to see recommended out there sort of 2 grams per kg of body weight. However, we do also know that athletes who do run a lower carb diet, and by lower carb, I'm talking maybe less than 30% of their daily calories coming from carbohydrate, then there is an additional requirement for protein because you're more likely to be breaking down and utilizing amino acids during extended training, which is really relevant for anyone in that endurance space.
Yeah, particularly like the more ectomorphic type athletes generally, right?
Definitely.
I always found, remember when I coached Tim Van Berkel, he was always very lean, he was naturally very ectomorphic, and when he went more low carb, we really had to make sure that he was taking protein during training.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because it just wouldn't. Otherwise, he just would get too lean and too skinny.
Yeah.
So in that particular case, what are you talking in terms of grams per kilogram?
Yeah, so you do see it's often recommended 2 grams per kg of body weight. However, to your point, if there isn't a lot of additional fuel to sort of source just on the body, like if you do have particularly lean athletes, then I'm chatting to and working with athletes who will be having 2.5 to 2.8 and even 3 grams per kg of body weight, which is what Jose, Antonio and I were talking about in the podcast.
Exactly. So now, like at the moment, like as you know, like I've changed. Like, I'm doing a lot more resistance training. I'm trying to hit closer to 3 most days, but it's it's hard to do. So for athletes, practically speaking, because I know that's what people want to take out of this chat, is that if you are, who would, so the people who want those higher ones are the people with a high training load, probably lower in the carbohydrate area. But like, I generally think that higher area of 3 grams per kilogram body weight will help most people's recovery anyway. But it's very hard. It's quite hard to do, especially if you do it through natural foods.
I agree.
So what are some tips and tricks on that side of things? I can tell you some of my tips and tricks, and then let's hear yours first. Let's go.
Okay, and then I'm really keen to hear yours as well. So first of all, who is it an appropriate recommendation for? I think exactly the person we're talking about, the ectomorph, high load athlete. I think if you do have...
Or someone just trying to gain simple mass, right? Gain body mass and maintain lean tissue, right?
Yeah, totally. And also any athlete that is up at around that 2, maybe 2.4 grams per kg body weight per day, and who are trying to, because that actually up to that 2.4 grams per kg body weight per day, that is a recommendation often used for someone wanting to improve body composition. So I forgot to mention that, and I just did want to sort of highlight that. But if you are experiencing issues with recovery, then I think, like to your point, even experimenting and pushing it higher for 3 or 4 weeks up to that 3 grams per kg body weight per day could be super interesting to look at. I think someone who weighs less, regardless of body size, like if you do have an athlete that is, let's say 90 kilos, then they're going to really struggle, and really it's probably not necessary for them to get up to that 3 grams. But an athlete who might be 55 kilos, then it's actually a lot easier.
Exactly. So we had that conversation because remember I was talking to you about Chelsea, and I was saying I wanted to. We were starting to experiment with Chelsea a little bit. Chelsea Sodaro, who those who don't know, Mikki also works with Chelsea, who I coach, so we work together in that space. And she's less than 55 kilos, and naturally struggles to maintain weight and mass. Right, so it seemed like it would make sense to hit those higher protein areas, right, for her, and it's not that hard for her either. But once you get up to the 85, 90s, then you have to gets pretty tricky.
It does get tricky, and it's also probably not as necessary, right? Because I mean, one of the issues that we were just discussing is that the body's going to be breaking down amino acids. Whereas if you have an athlete that has a lot of more adipose tissue, more fatty acids that they can draw on, then it obviously depends on your level of experience and how long you've been training. But that often, in that instance, they're going to be able to draw a lot more on fatty acids. But
it was I remember when I listened to your podcast with Jose, one of the studies that he mentioned that I just found fascinating was that one with the bodybuilders, and I can't remember the exact statistics, but it looked at muscle mass gains, and I think it compared like two like very high doses, right, and it was 2.5 and then versus 3, and then it was I think it was like 1.5, 2 and 3 or something like that, and 2 was much better at gaining muscle mass than 1.5, as was 3. There wasn't much difference between 2 and 3, but in 3, they got a lot leaner.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit, because obviously you mentioned body composition, and how protein helps. So what's happened? Why? I mean, that's of interest to anyone who not only is an athlete, but anyone who's just actually wanting to maintain a better, leaner body shape all year round, right? It seems logical to me to up the protein, and we'll talk about I will say quote unquote myths of increasing protein and the damages to the liver and what the potential is there, and if it's even true. But yeah, what's happening there? Because to me, it just seems like it would make so much sense for most people to be higher in the protein, because you're going to be, you can be satiated, you don't have to be hungry, and you can potentially be leaner, right? So
yeah, and I agree with you. I find it super fascinating. So with regards to I'm going to sort of break it down to maybe two areas. And the first one is what happens when you eat protein, right? So compared to when you consume either carbohydrate or fat, it's more metabolically costly to eat protein. So for every 100 calories of protein you eat, you will only actually have around 75 calories after the digestion process, and also the metabolic cost of muscle protein synthesis. So two things are going on, which means that you only have available calories of about 75% of those that you actually eat. And that is due to both the digestion, the thermogenic effect, so just the digestion process, but also the cost of muscle protein synthesis. So those are two areas where it sort of costs the body some calories. Compare that to carbohydrate. For every 100 calories of carbohydrate that you eat, you'll have access to 94 calories at the end of that digestion sort of process. And then for every 100 calories of fat you eat, you will store 99 of them. So fat takes next to no energy in order to digest. So already immediately you can see that if you prioritize protein sources in your diet and get a significant amount of your calories from protein, your body won't have access to nearly the same number of calories as it would if you favored carbohydrate or favored fat.
So because I know what listeners will want to know after you said that. So
yes.
With those statistics, obviously, like fats, 99% of it is it's very efficient at using it as a fuel and stored. So why bother with obviously there's other benefits of the micronutrients of fat, but from a weight loss perspective, surely it then speaks to just worry about proteins.
Yeah, you do need fat for satiety as well, though.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's because the most sort of satiating sort of diet is one that prioritizes protein, but you still have you still include some fat. Now, those in the low carb, high fat space would probably argue that fat is more satiating than protein. Even I've found clinically that is true for some people. It is much more likely to be true for males than it is females. And from an athlete perspective, that it doesn't really help with all of the other things that we've just been talking about with recovery. So it's not sort of an ideal thing.
I think there's not so much hyperpalatability in fat-based food as there is in carbohydrate-based foods.
Yeah.
And I think that where we've gone wrong with certain things, or where there's always been problems when people process whole foods, right? So there's like processed keto, there's processed,
yes.
and then that's where the problem comes in, because then you make something that's naturally not that highly palatable more palatable, and then you get
overeating.
Overeating. When someone's on the high fat and high protein, and they're having like the kind of more processed foods, which are fine in a lot of essence, but I do think that they're sometimes somewhat problematic, really.
Yeah, and also I think that the body craves, or as I understand it, the body doesn't just crave macronutrients; it also craves micronutrients. Yeah, so if you are low in things like potassium and calcium and magnesium, then you're more likely to overeat. And if what you're eating is processed food that doesn't provide you those nutrients, then that's another explanation.
There is argument to what behind some of the obesity epidemic, right? Is that very reason? Is that the processed food is just this spiral of lack of nutrients, and just by switching to more whole foods, whatever that means, you're by default getting more micronutrients, and therefore you're less full. he was on your podcast. Who's the specialist? I forgot his name. There's a guy who specializes in that side with the satiation of foods and the index of what micronutrients and the satiation of foods. What's his name?
It's Marty Kendall, I think.
That's it, Marty Kendall.
Yeah.
Super interesting. Really interesting space.
Totally. And Dan, just with regards to sort of the protein, so I talked about the cost of protein, what it costs to eat it versus carbohydrate or fat. But then, of course, and we've haven't explicitly said it, but alluded to it, that, protein just helps control your appetite. Like you are just not as hungry when you have a higher protein diet. And it blows me away how, even though I know it myself, but to hear other people experience it for the first time, as you do, like they're just like, they can't believe it.
Well, if you remember when I was trying to put on a bit of weight after California, after California Ironman, I really ramped up my protein, and I was also trying to hit quite high calories. Remember, I was trying to get to the 3,500, and then because protein was so satiating, and my own personal experience, this is the protein was so satiating, to then get the added required calories with whole foods, especially ones that are more natural high in fat. It was near impossible, because I was so full. So I had to switch and take more carbohydrates, because eating Rice Krispies or bread was quite easy, but eating something that's like peanut butter, I was like, oh, no way, I just couldn't do it, But yeah, so my little tip, I was going to say, my little tip with my trick with the higher the protein is, I do a protein bar in the morning, which is about, with my coffee, which is about 20 grams. I'll do my workout, and then my first shake of the day is like massively high in protein.
Is it? So what are we talking?
It's close to 100 grams.
Ah, okay. Amazing. Yeah. And
so
do you just do whey, or do you do collagen as well?
I do 3 different types of protein in there. So there's the whey isolate, the whey, and then and then another one.
Just hey, Dad, you leave that. I'll do it, because it'll be easier if it's not. Is that all right? Amazing.
Jared will cut that out, don't worry.
Yeah, I know. He'll do what Barry does. It's all good.
But yeah, and then 3 different types of protein. I'll have like an isolate, a normal whey, and then the bone broth protein.
Oh, people love that. Nice one.
Yeah, and then also add a couple of eggs. So that's another, like raw eggs. That's another 12 grams, pretty much. So and then a bit of milk and a bit of yogurt, and then boom.
Hey,
close to 100.
Do you reckon you eat more now than what you did as an athlete?
No,
no,
definitely not. No.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting.
Not intentionally, I will, but at the moment, now I'm not, because I'm trying to get, like I talked to you, I'm trying to get a bit leaner again.
Cool.
I've sized up, but like I was eating a lot, but I wasn't wanting to eat a lot. I was kind of always feeding myself a little bit, and now I'm kind of not eating as much, and I feel much happier. I was saying to someone the other day, I would sooner be permanently a little bit hungry than permanently a little bit full. I was a period of time when I was just sitting down for meals, and I'm just like, no. So
people talk about, like the physique athletes talk about that in their build phase, as even though the outcome of what you were trying to achieve was different. Same thing, like. It's very unsatisfying to eat when you are full. Actually,
it's not nice at all.
You lose a lot of the joy of eating.
Yeah, and I didn't like it at all.
Yeah,
so, but the question is, Mikki, am I in danger of death from that amount of protein?
Yes, I think this is a great question, and
because it's a question on everyone's lips, and everyone's going to be thinking, "Oh my word!"
I know. But so the main areas where people sort of have questions around is the kidneys and major organ damage from protein intake. And then, of course, there's mTOR, which is the anabolic pathway, the growth pathway in the body, which is activated by protein. So those are the 2 most common areas that people are a little bit, have questions about. So with regards to the kidneys, like there is no good long-term research conducted, and by long-term I mean over 12 months. There's no research actually that would show that a higher protein intake damages.
When you talk about higher in those studies, what was classified as higher? Because from my understanding it's very high, like really high.
4.4 grams per kg body weight per day was studied for 12 months. So in 12 months is a long time.
And that is a lot of protein.
It is a lot of protein. It's ridiculous. And this myth sort of perpetuates because for people who have CKD, like chronic kidney disease, stage 4 sort of renal failure, to offload the work on the kidneys, they are recommended a lower protein approach, whilst still recognizing, in fact, that the kidneys still actually need some amino acids. But so because a lower protein load is recommended for someone with kidney disease, it's almost like they've flipped it over and went, well, if that's the case, then a high protein load must be really damaging for healthy kidneys or for kidneys. And that's just not the case. And there are meta-analyses done on this. There are many clinical trials. There's absolutely nothing to support that premise, yet doctors will still say it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's like, I always find there's a few things in this world where where the evidence is so clear in one space, but yet the burden of truth always lies on the opposite side. Like, you know, I always feel like the burden of truth always lies on people proving that protein doesn't do harm, whereas it should be the burden of proof should be the other way around, because the doctor should be doing the burden of proof lies on them, because that's not where the evidence suggests. And it's not even it's so clear cut in that respect, you know?
Yeah. Do you know, this is a slight tangent, but I think it's worth mentioning because I think your listeners will be interested. It's like sodium. Like there's no evidence to suggest that for anyone with normal blood pressure, that sodium restriction is helpful at all, you know, like or will keep them healthy. Like there's nothing. Yet the recommended dietary intake for sodium is 2,400 milligrams, which is like a teaspoon of salt. And in fact, we are recommended to have 1,600 milligrams, which is like less than a teaspoon of salt. Like it is
so low,
crazy low, crazy. You need to talk to Rob Wolf, actually, I think, on your podcast. He'd be great to talk about electrolytes. Anyway.
I would, Me and him might have slightly opposing views, though.
Yes, I think you would, because you're a sodium denier, whereas I'm a sodium believer. I'm a sodium believer. But we can still be friends, so that's good.
It'll be good. We could have a bit of a conversation about it. It'll be actually really good. I'll see. I went on his podcast, so he...
Oh, there you go, Dan.
He owes me.
He does owe you. I agree. Anyway, so the kidney thing comes up a lot, but of course the cancer thing comes up a lot. So, and the sort of the link with protein and cancer in, there's no true link between protein intake and cancer, but protein does, or the amino acids do increase activity in that mTOR pathway, which is mammalian target of rapamycin. So it's essentially it's an anabolic pathway. It sparks growth. And in fact, this is what we want. When we eat protein, you want to increase the action or turn that pathway on, because that's what's going to help with muscle repair, recovery, and muscle turnover, and all the rest of it, right?
I think like mTOR and insulin have these same. They do the same thing, right? They're both for growth and very important for growth.
Yes, 100% important.
But they get marked into this evil, bad thing, right? And
And the thing is that the other thing which actually really sparks mTOR is, of course, exercise and strength training. You know, it does the same thing. And so a healthy response in the body is, as we would expect, you get the stimulus, like the protein or the strength training. You have that acute response, and then it goes back down to baseline, which is what we want. Same with insulin, exactly.
Yeah, that's what you want, is you eat the food, the insulin goes up, and then everything comes out. So.
Yeah, and so where protein gets sort of thrown under the bus when it comes to cancer is because it's the dysregulation of mTOR that is responsible for a lot of the growth and the potential harmful growth that occurs with tumours and cancer and those kinds of disease.
But it's prolonged, sustained, heightened.
It's dysregulated, it is. Yeah, and in fact, you mentioned insulin and insulin and chronically high insulin resistance.
Insulin-like growth factor.
Yep, that's much more likely to cause that dysregulated response. Not much more likely, that does. Like what we're talking about here with acute intake of protein at mealtime and strength training, does not. And that's where a lot of the debate, well, it's not even a debate, a lot of the in social media space, conversation is.
I think also that the the whole like fasting space and the fasting mimicking diet and Dr. Voltalongo and they all talk about mTOR and why you should restrict protein and why it's great for why it should be avoided, right? And I think that also gets a bit confusing.
I agree, Dan. But and I think we're obviously aligned in our thinking that what keeps your health span much more robust and what keeps you resilient as you age is bone mass and muscle mass.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And if you are always calorie restricting and you are low protein, then you are breaking down muscle tissue and you're breaking down your bone tissue. Like you are not staying resilient.
You see that a lot. I mean, I often do think that, protein restricted individuals matter in some particular diets that are protein restricted. I mean, I'm going to say it. I mean, a vegan diet, for example, is generally protein restricted.
Yes.
Yeah. But they generally do not look like the pictures of health, that need a bit more muscle mass and but I do think the evidence is quite strong. It's muscle mass, muscle strength, VO2 max are probably the three biggest indicators, right?
Yeah.
And it's not relative VO2 max, absolute VO2 max, so not important to your body weight. But yeah, it's really such a fascinating space, and I think everyone who just listened to that is going to be like mind blown. I believe.
Yeah. 100%.
It'll challenge a few beliefs in that space. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I will say as well, people forget that yes, you live in the moment, you're in the body you have, but you also want to think about the body you'll have in 30 and 40 years time. And I heard on a podcast yesterday, in fact, if you want to, if you do stay low protein or you're not active, just go to your local nursing home and have a look at the people in there, and that's probably going to be your fate, unnecessarily so. I don't know.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so Mikki, one of the other things I wanted to discuss, and you're always my go-to person on this, so it'll be wrong for me not to bring up is aspects of the female athlete.
Yes.
Obviously we work together with Chelsea, female athlete at the highest level. And there's a lot in this space, and even with my Endure IQ courses, for example, I get a lot of questions around female athletes and differences in training responses, differences in different areas of the menstrual cycle, whether they should have protein, whether it's really bad for them to have fasted training, and I think there's a lot of confusion. Some of it's true, some of it's not true. I mean, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to do it anyway. What I mean, let's just digress that or pull that apart. What is true in this space? What should female athletes be doing differently to male athletes when it comes to let's just focus in nutrition for a start. What are the differences?
Yeah, I would say so. One of the first things I will say is that if we go to the research literature as it stands currently, there is nothing to support that female athletes need to do anything different to male athletes in that research space. It just isn't, and for the same reasons why you can't, we aren't averages. No one is an average, yet studies report averages. So that's one thing. Second is the methodology of the studies to date haven't sort of accurately or sufficiently measured the menstrual cycle in the best possible way, maybe due to, the techniques are all different and or not sufficient. They've had women on the oral contraceptive pill and sort of normal menstruating women in the same groups. They assume certain things like a menstrual cycle is 28 days. For all of those sort of methodological challenges, it just means that we can't determine anything from the literature. I would also say, though, Dan, and you'll know this because you're an applied practitioner as well, is that every body is different.
That's always my. I think as much as we like to say there are differences between male and females, I think the main thing is there's just differences between people.
100%.
You know, like
yeah,
you could have two males who are more different than a male and a female.
Yep, I would totally agree.
That's why it's always best to look at in my opinion, it's always best to look at the individual, and regardless of gender, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And, you often hear that women are not small men, but women are not the same as each other. Either, women are not just all the same as women. And so another term I really like is auto-regulation. And I'm sure you've heard that term before. Like, you actually just have to assess how you feel across your menstrual cycle and make changes accordingly. Now, you asked me what kind of changes I think are important and might be more relevant or clearly relevant for a female and not a male due to the menstrual cycle. So I do just want to share a few of my sort of clinical aspects that I think about. Yeah. So if you do have, so let's say you've got a female and she is wanting to improve her body composition. So she's running a calorie deficit in her training, and you can absolutely do that with it. And yes, it's a state of low energy availability, but it's an acute state. It's just, that's what you need to do in order to improve body composition and lean out. I would say for that woman, though, that if she experiences that her recovery is poorer and her cravings are higher during her menstruals, during that late luteal phase, then you come out of your calorie deficit. What you might do is have, and let's say her menstrual cycle is the unicorn 28 days, you might have 3 weeks of where you are in a calorie deficit, and then you're back up at maintenance calories. So you actually have more energy in.
So you wouldn't go for I'm going to do this for a straight 2 months and just go for it. You would actually kind of cycle 3 weeks, 1 week, 3 week, 1 week, 3 week down, 1 week up, 3 week down, 1 week up. Or
for a woman who notices that she has that she has more cravings and stuff through the menstrual cycle, because not every woman does actually,
Well, there was actually just a paper. I'm going to actually look it up because I had it on my screen. There was a paper that was just brought out because we were just, for our training science summaries this week. Our new
TSS.
The TSS. So there was a new one that was just brought out by Taylor, and the title of it is "Menstrual Cycle Phase Has No Influence on Performance Determining Variables in Endurance Trained Athletes." The Findora project. So,
that's good.
Basically, it was saying that there are differences. But everyone's different.
Yes, and in fact, what is sort of statistically significant in a trial doesn't mean it's meaningfully different on the sports field or in the on race day or whatever. The other thing, though, I would say, Seda, is that for a woman who does have noticeable symptoms in her cycle, so she gets bloating, cramping, she has sort of late luteal insomnia, then there are dietary changes that you can make such as going dairy-free, such as increasing magnesium and zinc, such as having a low FODMAP diet for that week. What's low FODMAP? Because that might be a question. Yeah, nice one. So FODMAPs are a type of carbohydrate that you find in seemingly unrelated foods, but the FODMAP is an acronym that stands for fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharide, and polyols. I'm pretty sure that's what they are. But they're odd chain carbohydrates, which are which people can be sensitive to, and they can cause bloating and gastro issues, cramps, and things like that.
Actually, in a lot of sports drinks.
Yes, interestingly, for sure.
Yeah.
And
so I won't name any sports drinks, but there are in most sports drinks. It's in them. Which is why people experience a lot of bloating when they drink a lot of sports drinks.
100%, right? And then in the luteal phase, there can just be more inflammation because a woman has higher estrogen. So that's why making changes to the diet that helps offload some of that inflation and helps reduce
even
it.
Something as simple if you're an athlete, actually finding sports drinks that is, because there's actually a FODMAP. You can go online and you can look at all the foods that are FODMAP approved, so to speak, right? And even if you're used to having a normal sports drink, just swapping it out when you're training when you're in that particular phase to the one that suits you could have a positive effect, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the website you're referring to is Monash, and in fact they have an app as well.
Monash University do it, don't they? That's
yeah,
it. And
they
do. Have an app,
Yeah. And the other thing, Dan, is like I often hear. I remember listening to this podcast, and the female hosts were talking. They were like, in the luteal phase, progesterone is just so catabolic. You're just breaking down in that week, and I'm like, that is such hyperbole. That is like that. Yes.
Great
progesterone
word.
may be slightly catabolic, but I don't. So the reason why you might increase protein in your luteal phase, for example, when progesterone is at its highest, is because it might help offset cravings, but we already discussed raising calories to do that. Or you might naturally have a low protein approach, which isn't what I would advocate. So this is why I don't think you have to go real nuts on the protein in your luteal phase if you already have a higher protein diet across the board.
So what's happening with protein? What female athletes generally, are we talking high protein? Are we talking it depends on the athlete, what they're trying to achieve?
No, I think I would always go for a minimum of 2 grams of protein per kg body weight, if not more, like as we were talking about. But there are many, and even people who might think they have a high protein diet because they chuck in a protein smoothie at breakfast and they have a salad with chicken, like they can still have shy of 50 grams of protein by the time it comes to dinner time.
Yeah, because I mean, you talk about that dinner there, what you just explained there, you're probably, a normal shake would be about 30 grams of protein if you have 1 scoop of protein powder in there. The chicken's probably going to be 60 at best.
At best. And I would say people are very tied to the 100 grams of chicken model. Then that's like 22 grams, 25 grams of protein.
So you're way under 100. You're at 50. It's not actually that easy to be low. That's what I think. And this is why I really think it's beneficial for everybody, athlete, non-athlete, to do a food diary. Just, MyFitnessPal, whatever your app might be, just take it for 3 days, because it'll really educate you into knowing food and knowing how to control things. And I think that's really important.
I agree. And you've got to weigh your food, because we underestimate how the amount of things like peanut butter and mayonnaise and nuts and stuff. And we
serving of peanut butter is always very disappointing.
Oh, especially when it's crunchy. Like you just, especially when it's crunchy. And then we always overestimate the amount of chicken and meat, because if you ever eat out, the amounts that you get are just so small that you sort of normalize yourself to these small portions. So I agree with you, Dan, but you've got to use your food scales.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Very good. I'm kind of getting conscious of time, Mikki, but one of the things that we have to discuss on this podcast is the Pillar Performance podcast, obviously. So we do need to discuss supplements.
Yeah, amazing.
So, I mean, I guess a good starting point was, do you take any supplements?
I do, Dan, and every time someone asks me this question, I always forget about 2 or 3. But I thought about that before we started talking, so I couldn't tell you exactly what I take.
Oh, there you go. We go for it.
All right. So I start with. Am I allowed to mention other brand names of things?
Of course, brilliant.
Yeah. I start with Curran's, so black currant supplement.
Yep.
And I also sometimes take MitoQ, CoQ10.
So black currant supplement, we're doing a bit of experiment. There's a few studies going on at AUT at the moment.
I know.
Around fat oxidation and stuff. And
yeah, super interesting. And fat oxidation, but also like the potential for the recovery benefits with neutrophil action.
Yeah.
And
it's
just
amazing.
Vasodilator.
Those who don't know, they should check it out. It's Curran's, which is spelled NZ, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
CURREN.
ANZ, yeah.
ANZ, yeah. And, for New Zealand, but it's been, but like even the fat oxidation space, it seems to have a profound effect on fat oxidation for people with a low or poor fat oxidation. Those who had a high fat oxidation generally didn't show that much. So,
is there anything, Dan? Is there anything in the space where if you're already pretty good that you're going to get like,
I think it's the world over of all the nutritional things. It's just like magnesium, right?
Yeah.
If you look at magnesium and sleep, if you're already sufficient in magnesium, which most people aren't, so most people are low in magnesium, so it has an effect in most people. But if you're already sufficient, it doesn't have that much effect
Yeah,
But
interesting.
if you're insufficient, it has a massive effect on your sleep and your HRV.
Yeah.
But like most people are sufficient in magnesium, just especially if you're athletes and you're doing high intensity exercise and sweating a lot.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
okay. So currans, MitoQ.
MitoQ, good green vitality from Nuzest. It's got everything across the board, a bit like AG1, but better, I say. Definitely creatine. It's my absolute go-to and one I highly recommend everyone take. Collagen as well, so I chuck collagen in there. And then in the evening, that's sort of my morning stuff. And then in the evening...
So explain a bit about MitoQ, because I think many won't have heard of MitoQ. It's kind of quite popular in New Zealand. I'm not sure if it's made the rounds around the world yet.
I think it's popular with cardiologists overseas and doctors in quantum medicine, actually, which is a strange field, but a very interesting one.
It's a mitochondrial cleanser, so
it's like an antioxidant, right?
Yeah,
it is.
That's a good way to describe it, isn't it? It's a mitochondrial cleanser.
Yeah.
When I spoke to them, pretty much so many diseases and metabolic diseases are to do with mitochondrial dysfunction, right? And then pure glucose metabolism, and these potentially help with that.
100%. And interestingly, your heart has the highest concentration of CoQ10 in the body, which is why if you know anyone on a statin, they should also be taking a CoQ10. But it's got to be. But a lot of the formulations aren't elegant enough to be able to be absorbed properly. Which is why MitoQ is different, because of the sort of the carrier, the way they do it.
Yeah, that's what I understood too.
Nice one.
Because taking your Q10 on its own it's not really very readily available.
No.
Doesn't heart organ meat, isn't that really high in Q10?
Yes, it is, for that reason, because it's because that's where a lot of the where we have a lot of CoQ10. And in fact, if you take primal...
which I do. My boy's taking it now, actually.
Do they? Amazing.
He's taking the pills. He thinks, because he likes it, because Bella, she can't swallow pills. She just can't do it. She just falls out of it. But Jake can do it, who's younger than her, and he thinks it's brilliant. So he's always wanting to do it, just to show Bella that he can.
He can do it. It's amazing. It's amazing.
But is the Q10 in organ meat? Would that be better, the same, worse, or than not than MitoQ?
Than just CoQ10, taking CoQ10.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say it's better because it is, like, if it's organ meat, it's already in the form that you're, it's sort of body identical, if you like, because it's an organ. And equally in the supplements, they're freeze dried, so it's actually like it's a nutraceutical more than a supplement.
Yeah, I take the homegrown primal, and I have the it's like the one that's got kind of it's got liver, spleen, and heart in, and also the blood. You can do
nice.
Yeah. So because the blood's so biologically available and highly active, right? Something that's I feel I get a good feel good out of it. That's for sure.
I often feel that when I eat liver, like I get that, it does feel really good.
Yeah, I have a massive heart sat in my freezer downstairs, actually. Big from the local, but I need to get it out. I think it's easily the nicest organ meat there is.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's the most like a normal meat, really. It's it's a heart muscle, right? It's very normal. If you cut it right, I think I could give it to a lot of people who came around, and you wouldn't know. If you cut it properly, you wouldn't notice the difference between that and a normal steak.
Interesting.
It's pretty good.
Nice one. And of course, in the evening time, I take magnesium, as I talked to you about. The magnesium that I use has B6 and taurine in it too. So they're really good.
Benefits.
Pardon?
For added sleep.
It sort of acts like a neurotransmitter, right? And the magnesium is glycinate, and glycine is like a neurotransmitter in the brain. So just nice calming effect.
How many milligrams are you taking? How many milligrams is that?
I probably take about 450. I think the serve is about 300, but I like a bigger dose.
I think depending on how much you're sweating and how much high intensity you're doing, you can go. I've heard people going up to 500.
Well, do you know our old friend Dr. Peter Attia has grams a day?
What?
Yeah.
Grams a day? Wow.
Yeah, he has a whole mixture of he has oxide, he has citrate, he has glycinate and threonate.
Yeah. We actually got him some triple mag. We actually sent him some.
Good.
So yeah, via the way in. I don't know. I haven't heard any feedback, but maybe.
Good job.
Good news. I know that he's got it. So
nice one. That's nice. So yeah, those are my supplements really, Dan. I go through phases, obviously, of taking things like everyone. Oh, I do take vitamin D actually, which is something I recommend particularly in New Zealand. So
do you take that all year round or just during the winter months?
All year, no. I take it maybe 9 months of the year. I generally get a vitamin D test done once a year to see where I'm at. And if, like the last time I got mine done was in December and it was 117. So I'm like, I don't really need it for summer. Yeah. And then I'll just start taking it again. I've just started taking it again.
Is this something that most of us should be doing? Do you think we should be taking some bloods? I mean, when people take their bloods, vitamin D is obviously one that's always taken, but like plasma magnesium hardly ever taken.
No.
And why is that? Is it because it's just more expensive, or it would be really a very logical one to take, right? I think from what you've discussed, there's a few things that are no-brainers, like creatine's definitely no-brainer.
Yeah.
The evidence is so high. Magnesium's such a no-brainer. The evidence is really high for that. Omega-3s is a no-brainer.
Yes, I did mention that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say the other one would be vitamin D at the right time of year. I think just doing it all year round. My understanding is that there's certain steps that are missed in the process of making your own vitamin D through sunlight is much better because of the steps that are involved in that process that give off other things.
Yeah, I agree.
Vitamin D it misses a few steps. It's better than if you're not getting the sun. Of course, it's better, but it's better not to have it if you're getting sun.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's as I understand it as well.
Yeah.
And you asked about blood tests for things like magnesium and that. The thing is, the minerals in the body aren't stored in the bloodstream. So they really represent a small fraction of what we have. And then when you do have dysregulated electrolytes, it's more like you may be low or high in certain things, but it actually is less to do with that particular electrolyte and more about other things in the body, which I'm being very vague and I don't mean to, but I'm just trying to remember. It's just more, it means more than just it's a problem with the mineral. It's in the regulation of that mineral, which may actually highlight a different problem. So
so it's hard to know.
Yeah, it is hard to know. But I will say hair testing doesn't tell you much.
Hair testing doesn't tell you much.
No. And if you're in zinc testing as well, like, go and getting the taste test, like that in itself won't tell you anything really.
Right,
But actually zinc in the blood is marginally better, but it's great.
I always think it sounds like it's provided that you have good recording and you can weigh your food and you know exactly what you're taking. You could almost know whether someone's deficient just by a 7-day diary, right?
I agree.
You can look at what they're taking, whether they're getting any sources of magnesium from like leafy greens or whatever it might be, and you'd kind of know.
That's what I suggest people do is do that nutrition audit because even though what you intake doesn't necessarily tell you what you absorb, it gives you a much more comprehensive view of it. And of course there are like tests you can do to look at urine metabolites as well. Yeah, but they are costly. And triathletes, if you're a triathlete, you're already spending thousands of dollars on all these other things. Exactly. Well, then maybe you might as well, but I don't know.
Those race wheels aren't going to buy themselves.
No, exactly.
What would you rather have? No one can see. You can't show anyone your magnesium levels. No. You can show them your fancy race wheels.
This is true. True. Yeah.
No, really good. So, Mikki, to finish up, where can people? I'd love you to tell people about your podcast and what you do and where people can find you.
Yeah, fab, Dan. So my podcast is Micopedia.
Great
and
name.
I know I'm so thrilled. I had a very smart friend came up with that, and I'm like, years ago. And when I finally got around to doing a podcast, I'm like, it's Micopedia.
I'm just waiting for you to get bigger than Joe Rogan, and then
and then there'll be some sort of lawsuit.
And then Wikipedia are going to be suing you for that one.
Maybe. And so much like the Pillar Performance podcast, actually. I love discussing relevant topics in health, nutrition, fitness, science related to those topics on Micopedia. I also have I'm quite active on social media on Instagram at Mikki Williden. I have a weekly email that you can sign up for, much like the Enduro IQ Brew Up, which just sort of dives into typically whatever I'm interested in, actually, Dan. Like, it's a really good place for me to.
And even on your Instagram, you host quite a few. Like, I mean, you did one last night, I think, didn't you?
I do.
Q&As and stuff. So I mean, you give out a lot of great free content to people who follow you. Jump online. You can ask you a question. I think you're much braver than me. I don't do that, but I think it's really good.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I love it. I really love being able to, like, I guess be one of the vehicles for people getting the science out there into the, for us to sort of apply, but also understand there is so much misinformation out there, like ridiculous misinformation. We could do a whole podcast on what misinformation I think is out there.
Yeah.
That's generally where people can find me.
Very good.
Amazing.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for joining, and make sure everyone checks out Mikki on her Instagram. Check out Micopedia. It's a really great podcast. It's one of my. I don't know if I'm biased because you're a good friend, but I do listen to it regularly.
Amazing.
So, and you have some great guests on there. So yeah, thank you, and see you next time.
Dan, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.